Kash Patel has begun his first full day as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, following a swearing-in ceremony held late Friday in Washington. Patel, a longtime ally of former President Donald Trump, has already initiated significant structural changes at the Bureau, including the redeployment of hundreds of agents based in the nation's capital.
First full day in office of the new director of the FBI. Longtime vocal Trump ally Kash Patel arrived at his new office Friday, and big changes are expected. CBS News Justice correspondent Scott McFarland reports on Patel's arrival and an unrelated twist in one of the Justice Department's highest profile cases.
Good morning. Kash Patel was a controversial choice from the start to lead the FBI, which for generations has prized its independence from the White House. Patel had been an ardent Trump loyalist, and though he pledged independence during his Senate confirmation hearings, critics allege Patel will use the Bureau to target Trump's critics. And Patel had previously championed the January 6 rioters and had previously recommended arrests of some journalists. Patel took the oath of office in Washington late Friday and immediately ordered the redeployment of hundreds of Washington, D.C.-based FBI.
Patel's appointment has drawn considerable attention from the outset, given his public record as an ardent defender of Trump and his previous statements regarding the events of January 6th. During his Senate confirmation proceedings, Patel pledged to maintain the Bureau's independence from political influence, though critics have raised concerns about whether his leadership will reflect that commitment. Patel had previously advocated on behalf of individuals charged in connection with the Capitol riot and had suggested that some journalists should face arrest. The new director is restructuring the FBI into 3 regional divisions while maintaining direct oversight of key field offices, including the Los Angeles Bureau. Patel has stated that these changes will strengthen leadership engagement with field operations, though some analysts have expressed concern about potential impacts on inter-office coordination.
Is undergoing a major overhaul under new director Kash Patel. He's restructuring the agency into 3 regional branches while keeping key cities, including LA, under direct oversight. Patel says this will boost leadership and field engagement, but critics fear it could hurt coordination. He's also cutting headquarters staff, sending more agents into the field. These changes come as the FBI faces scrutiny over its handling of the January 6th riot.
Additionally, Patel has ordered reductions in headquarters staffing, with plans to shift more personnel into active field assignments. These organizational changes coincide with renewed scrutiny of the Bureau's handling of investigations related to the January 6th events. However, a separate development involving Patel himself has emerged as a focal point for legal analysts and investigators examining the classified documents case. To understand the full significance of recent evidence disclosures, it is necessary to examine Patel's specific role in the investigation into Trump's handling of presidential records after leaving office. Patel was not merely a peripheral figure in this matter. He occupied a central position in the factual dispute that formed the core of the case, specifically the question of whether Trump had actually declassified materials removed from the White House. Following Trump's departure from office, the National Archives sought the return of presidential records from Mar-a-Lago. During this process, Trump designated Patel as one of his official representatives to communicate with the archives. This designation placed Patel inside the operational chain of custody discussions, making him responsible for managing communications about what records existed, what should be returned, and what materials might have been declassified. Patel subsequently made public statements that carried significant weight in the broader narrative. In media appearances during 2022, he claimed to have personally witnessed Trump declassify large sets of records before leaving office. Patel asserted that Trump possessed the authority to declassify documents through verbal instruction alone. These statements provided what appeared to be eyewitness corroboration of the declassification defense, lending credibility to claims that the materials at Mar-a-Lago were no longer classified. The significance of these public statements became apparent when prosecutors began examining them against available evidence. If Patel's account of witnessing declassification was accurate, the legal foundation of the documents case would be substantially weakened. Conversely, If documentary evidence contradicted Patel's public claims, his position would shift from that of a defense witness to a figure whose statements were themselves subject to prosecutorial scrutiny. In October 2022, Patel appeared before the federal grand jury investigating the classified documents seized from Mar-a-Lago. Multiple news organizations reported that prosecutors granted him limited immunity in exchange for his testimony. Limited immunity agreements are typically employed when investigators believe a witness possesses essential information about a more significant target, and when obtaining that information requires protecting the witness from self-incrimination. The decision to grant Patel immunity indicates that prosecutors conducted a cost-benefit analysis and concluded that his testimony was sufficiently valuable to justify foregoing potential prosecution of Patel himself for any conduct he might disclose. This prosecutorial judgment reflects an assessment that Patel's knowledge was central to understanding the full scope of the documents case. The investigative interest in Patel extended beyond his grand jury testimony. Prosecutors obtained subpoenas for more than 2 years of his phone records, text messages, online identifiers, and financial information. These subpoenas were issued to telecommunications providers, including Verizon. A magistrate judge approved the subpoenas and authorized non-disclosure orders, preventing Patel from learning about the records requests. The judicial findings supporting these non-disclosure orders stated that there were reasonable grounds to believe that notification might result in destruction of evidence, witness intimidation, or jeopardy to the investigation. This determination, made by a federal magistrate rather than by partisan actors, indicates that the court assessed the risk of obstruction as credible and substantial enough to justify secret evidence gathering. The scope of the record subpoenas reveals the depth of prosecutorial interest in Patel's communications network. Investigators sought to map exchanges between Patel, Trump himself, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, and other figures in Trump's orbit during the period relevant to alleged obstruction and document retention. This investigative approach aimed to construct a comprehensive communications map documenting who communicated with whom, about what subjects, and at what times. Such mapping allows prosecutors to test witness accounts against documentary records. When a witness describes conversations or decisions, investigators can compare those descriptions against the actual pattern of calls, messages, and meetings. Discrepancies between testimony and records can indicate areas requiring further examination, while consistency between accounts and documents can corroborate truthful testimony. The non-disclosure orders meant that this evidence gathering proceeded without the knowledge of the subjects being investigated. Trump was unaware that Patel's records were being subpoenaed. Patel himself was unaware that his communications were being mapped. The investigation built its evidentiary foundation in secret, while the public narrative continued to feature Patel as a vocal defender of the declassification account. This investigative context is essential for understanding what has now emerged. Patel has reportedly provided evidence to investigators that directly implicates Trump in the classified documents matter. The precise contents of this evidence remain subject to ongoing examination, but its existence has been confirmed through multiple reporting channels. The evidentiary significance of this development is amplified by Patel's unique position in the case. As Trump's designated representative to the National Archives, he held official standing that most witnesses lacked. As the public face of the declassification narrative, his evidence carries special weight because any contradiction between his current disclosures and his previous public statements would undermine the defense he previously championed. As a recipient of limited immunity, his testimony was evaluated by prosecutors who determined it was valuable enough to warrant protection from self-incrimination. Patel's current position as FBI Director adds a layer of institutional complexity that legal scholars describe as unprecedented. The individual who testified under immunity about a president's document handling, whose records were secretly subpoenaed by grand jury order, whose communications were mapped as part of an obstruction investigation, now leads the federal bureau responsible for domestic criminal investigations. Since taking office, Patel has ordered the removal of at least 10 FBI personnel connected to previous Trump investigations, including the documents case and January 6th matters. He has publicly characterized the subpoenas for his own records as examples of government overreach, framing himself as a victim of politically motivated investigations rather than as a cooperating witness whose testimony and records contributed to the evidentiary record. This dual position creates what analysts describe as a fundamental tension. Patel is simultaneously a source of evidence implicating Trump and the director of the agency that would typically investigate such matters. He has used his institutional authority to dismiss personnel involved in building the case in which he was a central figure. He has publicly attacked the legitimacy of the investigative methods that gathered evidence from him while that evidence remains active in ongoing legal proceedings. The collision between these roles raises questions that lack clear precedent in American legal history. Whether Patel's evidence handover will lead to additional prosecutorial action that his directorship cannot prevent, or whether his use of FBI authority to dismantle investigative infrastructure will succeed in protecting his position while undermining the cases built on his prior cooperation, remains uncertain. Legal scholars note that the evidence Patel has provided enters a prosecutorial file that is already extensively documented. Prosecutors possess his immunized grand jury testimony. They have his communications records spanning more than 2 years. They have mapped his contacts with Trump, Wiles, and others in the relevant period. This comprehensive baseline allows immediate evaluation of new evidence against existing records, enabling prosecutors to assess consistency, identify contradictions, and determine whether the new material adds to, complicates, or alters the overall case. The argument advanced by Patel and his allies in the current administration frames his earlier testimony and the subpoenas for his records as products of a politically motivated investigation conducted by the previous administration. They characterize Patel's removal of FBI personnel as accountability for abuse of power, rather than retaliation against investigators. However, legal analysts counter that the non-disclosure orders were approved by a federal magistrate based on specific findings of reasonable grounds. The grand jury that heard Patel's testimony consisted of ordinary citizens operating within established legal processes. The evidence gathered through these methods was subjected to judicial oversight and approved through standard procedural mechanisms. Whatever political framing Patel applies to these events in his current capacity, the evidentiary record exists and was produced through legally authorized processes that the judicial system reviewed and approved. The immunity agreement Patel accepted, the testimony he provided under that agreement, and the records obtained through judicially approved subpoenas constitute a documented factual foundation that operates independently of subsequent political characterization. The ongoing examination of Patel's evidence by legal authorities, combined with his simultaneous exercise of FBI directorial authority, creates a situation that accountability advocates describe as without parallel in modern American governance. The outcome will likely depend on whether institutional checks, including congressional oversight and judicial review, can effectively address the tension between Patel's role as evidence provider and his role as head of the federal investigative agency. As this situation continues to develop, the relationship between Patel's current institutional actions and his prior cooperation with investigators will remain a central question for those examining the integrity of federal law enforcement and the accountability mechanisms designed to ensure that prosecutorial decisions remain grounded in evidence rather than political influence.